My high school GPA didn't even meet the bare minimum requirement for most universities. So the question is, how could I ever have gotten into a school like UC Berkeley, the top public university in the nation? Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Katie, otherwise known as the Vintage Academic. I'm a transfer student at UC Berkeley where I study Anthropology and Archaeology. I am also the head of the transfer admissions office over at Accepted Consulting, which is a college and graduate school admissions consulting firm where I help students get into their dream universities. So if you yourself are going through the application process right now, go ahead and check out the links in the description below where you can sign up for a consultation with me. And I will also leave a link to the essay writing guide that I made in case you need help writing your essays. Now, let's get on into today's video. Today, I want to talk to you guys about how I managed to get into UC Berkeley after barely scraping through high school and graduating with a 2.2 GPA. I will be talking about my stats later on in this video, so be sure to watch all the way through to get to that section. But before I get into like the stats and the numbers and the whole applying and getting into UC Berkeley part, I think it's important that I talk about my high school experience first. Up until July of this year, 2021, I did not know that I had ADHD. Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder, which can severely impact somebody's ability to pay attention and focus in school and follow through on assignments and things like that. This meant that while I was in high school, I was experiencing the loss of a parent at the same time as I was struggling with undiagnosed ADHD, which kind of equaled me doing not very well academically. I remember just barely getting by, like doing the bare minimum, and usually not having a good grasp of what was going on in school. Seeing as ADHD brains are brains that are motivated by things like interest and novelty, I tended to do well in the classes that I liked, things like stagecraft, art, social studies, which I find funny because I'm currently in a social sciences degree, and I did super poorly in other classes that were still required but I had no interest in, things like math and physics. I did manage to make it through high school without dropping out, but only by going to summer school every single summer in order to make up the bad grades from the previous year. And in my senior year of high school, I did not even bother applying to any colleges. Nor did I take any standardized tests, so I never took the SAT, I never took the ACT, and my high school GPA didn't even meet the bare minimum requirement for most universities. So the question is, how could I ever have gotten into a school like UC Berkeley, the top public university in the nation, and how could I possibly have a 4.0 as a senior? Long story short, I went to community college. I went to a community college because I knew I wasn't ready for a 4-year university. I knew I needed time to develop better study skills. I knew I needed time to figure out what I wanted to study in the first place. I just knew I wasn't capable of being a successful college student yet, and I needed an environment where I could set my own pace in order to become a successful student, rather than throwing myself to the wolves as a freshman at a 4-year institution. I also had basically like no understanding of how the US college education system worked, so I also needed time to figure that out and understand what kind of degree options were available to me. Now, when I went to community college, that's not to say that I succeeded right away. I definitely stumbled. My first semester, I got a C and an F. But the second semester, after taking my first anthropology class and realizing it was something you could actually major in, the interest part of my ADHD brain turned on. It sparked this little fire of passion, and I suddenly had a reason to do well in college. I really cared about learning about anthropology, figuring out how I could apply it to the real world, finding anthropology-related careers, and that's really what kind of catapulted me into figuring out the rest of this whole college thing. But that's not to say that it still wasn't kind of a struggle. I definitely struggled in some of my classes more than others. Classes like astronomy and statistics were some of the hardest classes I've ever taken because I really struggle with things like math. But like I said, now I had a reason to do well, and I actually managed to get through those classes with B's, and I'm so proud of myself for those B's. So after finally making my way through a significant portion of community college and figuring out transfer requirements, major requirements, and how to apply, I decided to apply, and I got rejected. It was for a good reason. I didn't actually have all of my transfer requirements filled out. And if you want to hear like the fuller length story about that, go ahead and check the description box. I'll leave a link to that video there. Anyways, I took the next year to fulfill the rest of my requirements. I tried again, and I got into all of the universities that I applied to, including the school I currently go to, who also just won the big game against Stanford, UC Berkeley. So now that you have a better understanding of what my process from going to a high school failure to somebody with a 4.0 at UC Berkeley actually looked like, let's take a look at what my community college stats looked like when I applied and got in. Before I do so, I want to say that this is is purely for educational purposes, and that you should try your best not to compare yourself to other people on the internet who have completely different circumstances than you. In addition, it's really important to remember that the UCs judge your application holistically, meaning that your GPA, your test scores, whatever, are not going to be a make it or break it deal. They value all parts of your application, including your extracurriculars, including your transcript, and especially including your essays, because that's where they actually get to know you as a person and not just a bunch of numbers on a page. Anyways, now that I've cleared all of that up, let's actually start talking about some numbers. First of all, my GPA. Now, like I said, I got an F and a C my first semester, so my first semester GPA of community college was not great. It was like a 2.0, but I'm lucky enough to have a fantastic support system and people who want to see me grow and help me succeed, and I had the opportunity to renew that F with something called academic renewal, which basically you retake the class and the better grade replaces the older grade. And by the time that I applied and transferred into UC Berkeley, I had a transferable GPA of a 3.8. My community college GPA was actually a little bit lower because it includes all of my courses, but my transferable GPA, so only the classes that were going to be able to transfer to UC Berkeley for credit, were taken into account, which boosted it to the 3.8. Next is test scores. One of my favorite things about being a California community college system was that at the time, freshman applicants were required to submit an SAT or an ACT score, but transfer students were not. I know it has since changed to make SAT and ACT scores optional across the board, but that was one of the things that made being a transfer student super attractive to me at the time. But long story short is I did not take any standardized tests, so I did not have any standardized test scores to submit. Now, when it comes to transcripts, I did have to submit my community college transcript, and I also had to submit my high school transcript to UC Berkeley when I submitted my intent to register. But when you hear this, please do not freak out. This is something that all of the UCs do when they offer you admission and you accept that admission. They essentially just want to know that you did indeed graduate high school, that you have a high school diploma, a GED, or some kind of equivalent. They don't care about the grades. The only grades that they take into consideration are your community college grades. So that's essentially it when it comes to numbers. In summary, I had 0 test scores and I had a 3.8 GPA. Next, I thought I would share with you just a little bit more information about what my application looked like, including the activities and awards section of the UC application, so like my extracurriculars. Before I get into this section though, I want to say that I recognize I'm incredibly privileged to have an incredible support system and a job that allowed me to have the time off and the money needed in order to participate in some of these extracurriculars, because they did take time away from my regular job. I know that not everybody has this privilege, but one of the great things about the UCs is that they take that into account when they're looking at your application, especially if you're a transfer student. The fact of the matter is most community college students have extenuating circumstances, whether it's lack of finances, or you have family members to care for, or you have to work full-time, that prevent students from participating in extracurricular activities. But the UCs do still value things like having a full-time job or having to care for family members, and those are things that you can put on your extracurricular section. So that is one of the things that I greatly value about the community college to UC transfer system. I think that's just really important because it takes into account some of the things that prevent people from getting a higher education. Anyways, I'm rambling. Here are the things that I put on my application. Number 1, I put on there that I was the president of my Anthropology club at my community college for 2 years. I also put that I was on my community college's honor roll, which required having at least a 3.5 GPA while taking full-time units. The third thing I put on there was that I was in the Honor Society for Community Colleges, which was called Phi Theta Kappa, and that I was an officer for a semester, and we did like projects for the campus and things like that. The fourth thing that I put on there was that I'd been working at the same job for 6 to 7 years. It's the same job that I've had since I graduated high school, and I do still actually work for that company. So that definitely was something I wanted to put on my transcript, because some of the things that the UCs value are things like the amount of time that you've spent doing something, commitment, dedication, so on and so forth. The fifth thing that I put in the activities and awards section was the fact that I've been dancing since the 9th grade. I danced ballet. I don't really do it so much anymore, but it was important when I was applying. The sixth thing that I put on there was my volunteer and internship time at the California History Museum in Sacramento. I was a volunteer docent, which meant that I worked the floor and I was there to answer questions for any visitors, and I could guide them through the exhibits. Then as an intern, I was part of their summer program for K through 12 students. And then lastly, I put my volunteer archaeology work for the Bureau of Land Management, which I did for 1 week out of the year for 2 years, and described like the kinds of things that I did during that volunteer experience and the things that I learned. I do want to say that when you are picking out your extracurriculars to put onto your UC UC application, you should keep a couple of things in mind. One, I already said, think about things that demonstrate skills, talents, or values, things that you've done for a long time that show commitment and dedication. And it can also be helpful to include things that demonstrate like your commitment to the major that you're applying for in the UC system. So in my extracurriculars, you can see that I included things that demonstrated like leadership abilities, commitment, dedication, academic involvement in my interests, which included things like museum studies and anthropology and archaeology. So I think that pretty much just wraps up everything that I wanted to say about stats and numbers for my application to the UC system. Normally I would talk about essays, but this video is already going to be long enough, so if you want to hear more about my essays and the essay writing process and how to write your own essays, go ahead and check the link below again for more resources on that, both my essay writing guide and also I have made a lot of videos on the topic about writing your transfer essays, so there's definitely a lot of information on my channel if you're looking for that. And before I go, I just need to remind you guys one more time that the UCs do not really care if you have a perfect GPA or an impressive resume or perfect test scores. What they really care about is that you're a passionate, well-rounded student and that you're able to demonstrate that both through your application and your essays. With that being said, don't forget to check the description for all of the links that I've already mentioned. Don't forget to check out my services if you need extra help on your application. Don't forget to like the video and drop me a comment. Tell me, what do you think is the most important component of an application for a transfer student? Subscribe for more college application advice and UC Berkeley content, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye!